This is SoulCharge, the podcast for women leaders to take the highest level of ownership of their power to create results now. I'm your host, Stacy B. Let's dive in. Welcome back to another episode of SoulCharge. Today, I am going to take you on a journey with a very special guest expert on ownership. As leaders, we are so well versed in owning our results, getting results through others, and making sure that we own those metrics and those results. But the thing that often goes overlooked is the ownership of who we are being, the ownership of our internal state, and the ownership of our leadership that is really knocking at our door. Each of you that is listening to this podcast has a next level version of you that is waiting to be claimed. It's our goal in this episode that we give you a unique perspective on ownership and what it really looks like to take ownership at that higher level, but to look at ownership a little bit differently from the perspective of owning the next level of you to accelerate the process of that being realized. I'm joined today by a special guest, Mike McHargue. Mike has been consulting for over 20 years and is a principal consultant with Patrick Lencioni at the Table Group. Mike has some exciting news he's going to share with us on today's episode, and we're going to deep dive on ownership, share some inspiring stories of top industry experts and leaders that are really moving through the world in that next level ownership, and also share Mike's very exciting news with you. So get ready and let's dive in. Welcome back to another episode of SoulCharge. I am joined today by a very special guest and dear friend, Mike McHargue. Mike, so good to see you.
It's great to be with you, Stacy. Thanks for having me on your podcast. What a treat this is for me.
Yes. We actually recorded this podcast prior and had a very funny experience, which I just have to allude to because I feel like our listeners would appreciate it because those of you that have a podcast, you know, it's funny when you get so in the moment with your guest or even on a solo episode that you don't realize that the cushion is slipping beneath you. And all of a sudden you and the guest are about 6 inches in height difference. And that's what happened with Mike and I. So
Yeah.
we are re-recording and I'm excited about it today. So, Mike, I first want to kick us off with, you have some very exciting news. Share with our listeners your news.
I do.
Today.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks again for having me on. My exciting news is that I've got a book that is, I've had published, is coming out on October 29th. It's called That's on Me. And it's been a labor of love. And I'm just excited to get it into the marketplace. And I appreciate you helping me talk about it a little bit, some of the key themes on the book. So that's what my news is.
Yes. Well, congratulations. And I'm excited. Much. You're so welcome. I'm excited to have you on the pod and have this conversation because part of what I love about you and what you represent, and what comes out in this book is very much around authenticity and vulnerability and leadership. And
yes.
That's so in alignment with SoulCharge and what we want to have a conversation around, you know, around ownership and leadership. And so I'd love to speak for just a moment around the book and almost like the spirit of the book. How would you describe like the spirit or one message that you want leaders to have by reading this book?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I will tell you talking about vulnerability. I mean, the book is called That's on Me, Seasoned Executives Confess Their Rookie Mistakes. And if you think about the title, That's on Me, you're just saying, hey, I blew it. I made a mistake. Here's an error I made. And there's a certain amount of vulnerability in that. And people ask me, what's the book about? Well, it's about mistakes for sure. But really, the underlying theme is vulnerability. To have 35 CEOs and other senior executive leaders from companies say, hey, I've made mistakes. And not only I'm willing to admit the mistake, but I'm willing to publish that mistake for the rest of the world to see. Because if I can help other leaders through a mistake that I made, that's going to be good for everybody. So, I mean, it's a book about mistakes, yeah, but it's a book about vulnerability and being unguarded and genuine, which is what good leaders do.
Yes. And what I love about the fact that the book is really about vulnerability is that these leaders are willing to show these mistakes that they've made and be vulnerable to pave the way for other leaders to see that there is strength and powerful impact that you can make when you're vulnerable.
Absolutely. I think there's an old adage when we talk about leadership of that idea of never let them see you sweat. Right.
Yeah.
That was it was in a deodorant commercial or something years ago. And the reality is, good leaders allow people to see when they sweat and when they're scared and when they're challenged or when they're not good at something. One of the exercises I do when I work with leaders and teams is, hey, who's the best leader you ever worked with and what made them great? Rarely does someone say that person was so cool under pressure. They never got flustered. It's usually that person was real. They supported me. They cared about me. They told me when they were struggling so I could help. And I wanted to follow that person, forever. It's not the one that's cold and calculating and never get bothered by anything. That's not the leader people talk about.
Yes, exactly. And I think that this idea around vulnerability and taking really ownership of the mistakes by way of vocalizing them, like that's really the first step in owning your mistake and not making yourself wrong for it. I think that's such a huge part of you talking about it in the way that you are is actually in and of itself a huge lesson that I want to highlight here is that when we vocalize our mistakes, it's also an opportunity to get it out of our head, turning it into a teaching moment, and also not making ourselves wrong in the process. Because when we hold on to the mistake, it's kind of that idea that Brene Brown talks about. It's like shame is in silence. And it's like vocalizing the mistake allows us to connect to our humanity and also show other people what it looks like to be a leader. We're just like everyone else and we make mistakes like everyone else.
That's right. It definitely humanizes leaders, and none of us are perfect. And those of us who are willing to admit that, you get better. And I think the leaders that I get to work with and leaders in this book are ones that are telling the stories of their mistake. When they do that, it not only says, hey, here's something you watch out for as a new leader or as or a seasoned leader, but it also says, I'm willing to admit my mistakes. We all should do that. Like everybody on the team, even if you're a senior leader, because then you get better and then your people start doing the same thing and they get better. And so it's just a cycle that just continues.
Yes. Yeah. Would you take us through one of the stories in the books? One of the mistakes? I'd love to have you share that and then rip on that a little bit.
Yeah, boy. It's like asking me to choose my favorite child, and I don't know that I could do that. There are a few that come to mind, and I'm super passionate. I know you have worked a lot with women leaders over time in your business, and your work is for all leaders. I realize that, but I have some really amazing women in my book that I would love to highlight at least one or maybe a couple of them over the course of the podcast.
That'd be great.
And yeah. The first one that comes to mind is the first one that's in the book, and that's Beth Toll, who is an amazing leader. She's the vice president of communications and marketing for St. Luke's Health System, the largest health system here in Idaho. But great leader, amazing woman, and a humble leader for sure. But the mistake that she shares was that she was really good at communicating about St. Luke's across the world into Idaho outside of the organization. But her mistake was she hadn't done as good a job of communicating internally to her team and the people throughout her organization. Where they really needed that. People inside of organization need clarity just like people outside of organization needed. And she needed to get better at over communicating the messages and the things that they were trying to do to create clarity in the organization. So her willingness to say, hey, even though this is my area, I made a mistake around this and I could get better. I think it sent a message to all of her people that they could get better at things too. And they should admit those things and work on those things. So that's probably the first one that comes to mind just because it's the first amazing woman that's in my story. And I just wanted to highlight that one.
Yeah, that makes me think of something else that stands out in leadership is like this idea of when we're too close to something is kind of the thing that we do a couple of things. When we're too close to it, we don't realize how much talent we have around it, right? Where it's like our everyday experience really could be the thing that other people that want to hear from us, like want to hear us teach them. That's like the first thing that popped into my mind. But also the other thing is this idea of admitting that when you're in something, you don't always have that like peripheral vision, right? Or that broad vision to like, and let me say it differently. It's like when you're too close to something, it's a lot easier to go outward and make sure you're sort of like dotting all those I's and crossing those T's. But what's close to you can be a ball that's dropped or something, and how common that is in leadership.
Oh, for sure. For sure. I mean, I think, this, having peers that can look at things that are going on, giving you feedback, having a boss that can do that, having people who work for you who can do that, but being able to accept the feedback and take the feedback. You're right. I mean, it's so easy to get focused on your particular area and not be able to see the forest for the trees.
Yes.
And I will tell you, the leaders in this book and all leaders I work with, these are lonely jobs. Like for sure, the higher you get in an organization, the lonelier your jobs become, the funnier your jokes become, and the harder it is to get people to tell you the truth, right? And so we got to be able to lean on each other and get feedback from each other. And if it's not within your organization, which would be ideal, you got to have other leaders around you. And I know your business is all about that, and the work that you do is all around that, because you and I are in the entrepreneurs organization together. And being able to have someone like you telling me, Mike, why'd you do it that way? Or that was not the best idea. Or how about this? I can see the bigger picture because of that. And I'm grateful for you and our peers in the E organization for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, right back at you. And I was just going to say, like, that's probably why, not probably, I mean, one of the reasons why these powerful leaders hire you and your organization is because they're too close to the issue or the mistake, and your work really helps them look at all of those things and sort of zoom out so that they can see the forest through the trees, if you will,
Yeah, for sure. And especially when it's like the CEO, the CEO or the top person in an organization, executive director, president, whatever it might be, those people are the loneliest ones of all, honestly, because they don't have any peers.
Yes.
And people are always telling them what they want to hear. And so, I sometimes fill that gap and tell them what maybe they don't want to hear or what they do, but no one will say.
Right.
And if I'm going to be worth my weight as a consultant, I gotta give them the truth. Here's what I'm seeing. Here's what you're doing well. Keep doing it. But here's something you're not doing that well. And that might be costing you a whole lot. Yeah. Occasionally, that's the last conversation I ever have with a leader. But if that leader is going to be offended and not take it the right way, they're probably the wrong leader for me to work with anyway.
Yes. Yeah. Do you find that with the different mistakes that are revealed in this book that you do, like in your work with these leaders, help them work through those mistakes or navigate those mistakes?
Yeah. Most of the way this book came about is I started asking a question to leaders, usually the second or third time I was with them, said, what's the biggest mistake you ever made? How did it affect your people and your team? And it was really more just to get them talking and to be a little vulnerable and kind of get the whole conversation going. But the stories were really rich. And I was like, boy, if I ever write a book someday, maybe I could use that story. And they were usually, very welcome to do that. But yeah, it is all based upon the work that we do. And, the categories really quickly are allowing confusion in the organization. That's a big category of mistakes. And the failing to connect with your team is another category of mistakes. Running truly awful meetings. We've all run awful meetings and that's bad news, right? Bad meetings lead to bad decisions. There's no two ways about that. Hiring and firing is the third category of mistakes that leaders make. And the last one is giving feedback and receiving feedback. And so these are all things that I try to work with leaders on and try to help them get better at. And it all comes up in the work that we do to make their organizations healthier, their teams better.
Yeah. So out of those categories, is there one that is where you like to go first with a leader because it affects the other categories? Almost like the domino that hits the other dominoes?
Yeah, the work that I and my peers at the table group, we work on two things primarily with executive teams. One is becoming a more cohesive team, and the other is to create clarity for the organization. Yeah. So they're a little out of order in the book just because that's the kind of the way it's framed together. But I always try to do that when I spend a couple of days with leadership team, is it's really lean into those two things. And being a cohesive team, that the connecting piece is where that one kind of shows up in the book. And then the allowing confusion is where the clarity comes in. So probably both of those are where I spend the majority of time. A lot of the other things that are in the book kind of follow that team getting aligned behaviorally and intellectually.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. So now, when you work with a team, or really a leader that
Yeah.
needs to create clarity in the organization, I think
Yeah.
one thing that I see a lot in the leaders I work with is when I start working with them, there's been this vision that they've stood behind for a long time, and they've changed as a leader. And so the vision and the purpose is changing and evolving. And so
Yeah.
do you find that, like, when a leader is going through that almost like evolutionary process, like as a leader, when that vision changes a little bit because they're changing, that the
Yeah.
clarity with the team needs to be reset, reimagined, and delivered again, right? To get everyone on the same page?
Yeah, I do think that. But I think there's two things in play here. One is our organizational clarity. What's our purpose? What are our values? What do we do here? What's our strategy? What's most important right now? All questions I help teams work with for the company.
Okay.
But as you started to speak to here, a leader changes over time too. And understanding, their purpose might change. It might change along with the company. It might change away from the company. And so it's not that uncommon for someone to outgrow a company or to outgrow an industry that they're in, or just flat out get tired, because we all get tired. And sometimes you need a fresh start or a new break, or the person who starts a company isn't always the best one to grow it to the next level or to really take it to, Fortune 500 status. I mean, that person's a unicorn, doesn't really exist in my experience. So really, people often ask, like, what's the best type of leader? Like, whether it's taking the Myers-Briggs or the Working Genius or something, what's the best type of leader? The only right answer is the one who's most self-aware. The one who is aware. What am I doing well? What am I not doing well? Where are my blind spots? What can I get better at? Where do I need to back off and let my team do their job? Those are the leaders that are the best leaders of all.
Yes. Yeah. And then do you see that they are also the leader that executes on what they're self-aware of, or do you find that they need that support, whether it's from someone like you in your business, to download that to the team to execute?
Yeah, no, I think when you're self-aware, some leaders are good at starting stuff up. They're not very good at finishing.
Yes.
Some are great at finishing, not really good at getting stuff going. Some are good about communicating to the organization and rallying people and getting them excited. Other people, not so much. So, really understanding that. Where's your energy? Where's your passion? What are you good at? What are you not good at? And being able to, surround yourself by people who can fill in those gaps and make up for the things you're not very good at. That's key to the whole thing. I've aligned my business 100% to Patrick Lencioni and his work at the Table Group. And he's got this tool called the Working Genius, which I think we may have talked about before. In fact, I think you took it. And it's all about finding what gives you energy, what drains you, what do you get energy from, and really understanding that in order to be a better leader and a better teammate.
Yes. Yeah. And I love, bringing all of this conversation like back to your book and really inviting leaders to the table of vulnerability is what your book is this catalyst for, in my mind, and the spirit of it, as we've talked about. And it's like the vulnerability to own your mistakes, the permission to be vulnerable, that's actually what makes a fantastic leader. It's like all of the other challenges and things that come our way and the ways in which we have to take ownership. It's like if we do that as leaders from this state of vulnerability, it's almost like this is this foundation that we can plug into. And it's almost this filtering system, if you will. Like I like to create filtering systems for myself because there's so much noise throughout the day and there's so many decisions that I have to make that I create filters so that it's easier for me. It's like, does this equal that? No, I don't touch it. Does this equal that? Yes, great, we're moving it forward. And I think that we could create a filtering system through the spirit of your book, which is like, am I being vulnerable right now? And if the leader answers no to that, like even taking a step back and getting to that place within themselves and going back to deal with the challenge or the opportunity, whatever's happening, could be such an empowering way to really root in their leadership and deal with, I was going to use the word attack or deal with what's coming their way. Because if you're vulnerable, it's almost like that's the start and the end.
Yeah. No, it's so true. I mean, that's the key to the best leaders. And you talk about filters. I get very lucky in my line of work
Mm.
because I get to work with the best leaders in the world who
Yeah.
are humble enough to say they could use some help. I need some help. Some of them are absolutely great leaders, but the leaders who are guarded and not genuine and lack humility, they're never going to invite me in. They're never going. Why would I need you? Like, I got this. Like, I got this thing figured out. I wouldn't need that. That's one who would never be in my book because they would never admit their mistakes. They certainly wouldn't let other people know about them or read about them, and it wouldn't be in the book. So, humility, vulnerability. Here's what I'm good at. Here's what I'm not that good at. I could really use some help. I'm struggling here. I'm sorry, I blew it. Like, those are all words that great leaders use all the time, and it makes them as strong as they are. That's probably a differentiator, I think, of anything between good leaders and bad leaders is the humility and the vulnerability they're willing to share.
Yes. And the tool that you mentioned, the working genius, is such a great tool. And I think it's also just tying into this like permission topic, around like the permission to be amazing at what you're amazing at, and then hire and delegate for what you're not amazing at.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think that as a leader, sometimes, and not sometimes, I think oftentimes it happens a lot more than we're willing to admit, is that we delay the success for ourselves, our teams, and the business when we try to be something that we're not, when we try to be good at it all. And we would be a lot further ahead if we just leaned into, you know what, I'm really weak at this. And someone else loves checking email and organizing thoughts and content, right? Giving that to them. They can thrive, which frees you up. But I think this idea of, okay, I'm going to wait until I get that support for myself until I get to this level. It's actually much more strategic, and it's just better to really evaluate what your weaknesses are from the start, no matter where you are in your leadership journey, but to evaluate that and really start to plan for that as you start the business, or if you're in the middle of the business. What support do you need? And if you were to lean all into your genius, what would that mean for the business and everyone around you?
Yeah, no, I love it. I think that's all right. As you're talking there, two stories come to mind from the book. One is Sean Hunter. He's the CEO of a company called Mindscaling, and he was trying to be involved in every single piece. And as his business grew, he wanted to be involved in everything, and there wasn't enough of him to go around. And he found like, hey, I'm not letting people do their jobs. It's not good for them. It's not good for me. I'm stressed. I'm burned out. I can't possibly do it all. And his awareness was, I got to let people do their jobs and do the things that I'm good at. Yeah. Another one that comes to mind is Babu Sharma, who's the CFO of Pacific Life, a large insurance company. And his story is about humility, just flat out. I could be more humble. Because and we're all like this, you get promoted into new positions, and you're the youngest one to ever do that, and you get the certification, and all of a sudden you're promoted to CEO of a business unit. You start believing, man, I'm pretty good. Wow, I'm really great. But the reality is you have to keep your humility, and you have to make your mistakes and be vulnerable. And he was honest. I think most of us as leaders struggle with that. He was honest in the book, like, I got to watch this. I got to be careful about this. Because you can believe what people are saying about you, especially as you move up an organization. And that's not always good.
Yes. Yeah. I love those stories so much. I'd love to switch gears for just a moment and talk about your journey of becoming an author. I think a lot of people that are listening, maybe the people that are listening have an idea. They have, been a leader for some time, and they have these different teachings or, thought leadership that they want to bring into the world. Yeah. What was your journey like, first and foremost, of your decision to publish a book?
Yeah. Well, boy, there was kind of a lot to it. So first of all, I got a little leg up because I'm married to, and my amazing wife is also an amazing editor. And so I kind of lucked out there. And for the first 20 years of our marriage, I was like, man, if I was smart enough about anything at all, expert in anything, I could write a book. I mean, I'm married to an editor. Well, it turns out I am an expert at one thing, and that's making mistakes. And so that's what my books ended up being about. But, as I was thinking, I'd like to be an author if I come up with something. When I started doing this work and asking that question, what's the biggest mistake you've made? how did it affect your people and your teams? The stories were rich. The leaders were vulnerable. I thought, okay, I think I can pull this thing all together in a book. I've heard people say that authoring a book is kind of like giving birth, or is as difficult as giving birth. Now, I've actually been in the room when my wife's giving birth, and I'm going to tell you, it's not that hard. It is not that hard. I do not believe that. But it is difficult, and there's a lot of work, especially when you're not good at finishing things, and that's one of my weaknesses as a leader. When you're challenged with coming up with real, brilliant, new ideas, that's not my area of expertise either. It was a struggle to pull this together. And so whereas a Patrick Lencioni or other thought leaders come up with these brilliant ideas and invent things, I'm not that way. But I was able to take things that I could apply with the leaders I was responsible for and bring those to life in the book. And that's what I did. That's what I did. But it helps to have a wife who's an editor, because she knows the process. She helped me a lot. She will also tell you, if she was on this podcast right now, that I'm the most difficult author she's ever worked with.
Really?
Yeah. Mainly because I wouldn't leave her alone. All the other authors she works with, some 300 of them, she could just hang up on them, at the end of, okay, goodbye. And I'm like, hey, what about this? What about this? So I don't know. I feel sad for her, but she was super great and super helpful.
So great. So tip number 1 is get yourself a relationship with an editor. No.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, marry an editor. That will help. That will help for sure.
Yeah. Was there anything that you did throughout the process, or a moment where you were like, oh, this was the tool that really helped me bring all of my ideas together? For anyone that might be listening that is like, I know I want to write a book, but there's so many stories we tell ourselves. I'm not prepared. I need to wait. I need to achieve this before I can do that. And sometimes you actually have all the pieces. We just need to sit down with ourselves in a quiet place and bring it all together, in an afternoon. Any thoughts on that?
One thing that just came to mind when you said this is that I think it's real easy to think about it and think about it and think about it forever. Like, someday I'll write a book. It's easy to say, I want it to be perfect. I want it to be all figured out in my mind before I actually start putting a pen to paper, right? And the reality is, I don't think that's how it works, at least not for most people, certainly not for me. So you just got to get going. Like, you start writing, you start changing things. And if you've got someone you can bang the writing off to someone who says, it's not very good, but here's something that is pretty good. I like that. Maybe not so much of this. Like that, just starting the process and getting it going, I think is an important part of this journey, because it's not going to be perfect on the first time out, unless you're, I don't know, a prodigy or something. And I certainly was not. So get going, and find some professional help too. I mean, I had a built-in editor, which I'm really appreciative of. There's a lot of people out there who will do that, who will help take you from a cocktail napkin to a few written pages, or from a few written pages to something that really makes some sense. And so finding someone who understands that process and will give you some honest and direct feedback, I think that's critical too.
Yeah. And I love what you just said, because it's just the perfect statement to wrap our whole conversation up with a bow. And that is, what I heard you say is your mantra with your daughters. Let's go, right?
Let's go. Yeah, exactly.
What we, at the end of the day, want to inspire all of you listeners to do is you can create anything. And the way to do that is not over planning, not over preparing, but a lot of times taking action and just get going with the idea, whatever that means. So I just wanted to highlight that, because it's so true.
Yeah. And one thing I'll say, just in terms of a wrap up here, another thought I had is, in the book, there's 35 mistakes, great leaders talking about their mistakes. But the very last story is from a leader named Tavo Godfredson, a good friend of mine. He's now an executive coach. But his story was in the feedback section. And he said the most important thing a leader can do is ask for feedback and then act upon it. Ask for feedback and then act upon it. Because when a leader does that, the leader is doing a couple of things. First of all, being vulnerable. And you and I have talked about that, right? I'm vulnerable to say I'm not good at that. So you're asking for feedback. But then when you act on it, it sends a message to the whole organization. Hey, I'm willing to ask for feedback. I'm willing to get better. And the unwritten or the unspoken message, you can too. And the whole organization gets better as a result of that. So at the very back of the book, I put in a small assessment where leaders can grade themselves on the mistakes in the previous chapters and say, what am I doing well and what am I not doing well? It's a great conversation starter for any leader. Hey, I just did an assessment. I think I'm pretty good at these things, but I don't think I'm very good at these things. What do you guys think? It's a great way to start the vulnerability process. be unguarded and make the whole organization better. So that's something that's there and useful for you if you're interested in the book.
Yeah, that's great. Is there anything else that you want to leave our listeners with as a final message on today's podcast?
Well, I think it's embarrassing to ask people to buy your book, and so I'm not going to do that. But the book is really designed to be something that you can pick it up. Like, oh, my meetings are not the best. I could pick up a couple of chapters in the meeting one and make my meetings better. Or I'm not as clear as I could be, and you could do that. I'm a big fan of easy to digest and easy to apply. And so I tried to write it 2 or 3 pages each story, something in there that you could use and apply right away. And so I guess that's the last thing I'd just say about my book. And I'm just so grateful that you're willing to have me on the podcast. So great to be with you always, Stacy. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being here. And I just want to say, you, Mike, and this, what I love about these conversations is there are these little nuggets along the way that it feels like, we're just having a conversation like we would if we were together, right? But one thing that stands out to me that I just want to speak life into is that leaders are constantly focused on adding value. And you, Mike, are a beautiful representation of a leader that contributes so much. And so it is such a pleasure for me and this podcast and everyone that's listening that is going to support your mission and buy your book. It's such a joy and pleasure for us to contribute in the small way that we are, because you do this every day. And I just think that I think this process of you writing this book is this opportunity for you to receive all the magic you've contributed to all the people in your life that love and adore you. And I'm glad that I get to be a part of seeing you just receive the benefit of people buying your book because of the magic you put out in the world. So it's just such a pleasure. And I just wanted to speak to that deserving quality in you.
Well, thank you. It's embarrassing for you to say that, especially knowing this is being recorded and other people are going to watch it too. But I'm grateful. I think the world of you, and I'm just grateful that you gave me the opportunity to speak to my book and to share a few things today. So grateful.
Thank you. This was amazing. Are you loving SoulCharge? If so, hit the subscribe button, leave a review, and share an episode. We want to bring powerful content to women leaders each week so that women can be unleashed to create the results that they want now. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.